Hi, this is the third video in this set of videos that's going over how to make your first Flask web application. And so far we have a website that basically has a header, and then that header says what it does, and then it takes a parameter for the person to say hello to. So right now, if we open this up in a new tab, and I change my URL bar. And so instead of just having my first Flask app.laurentan.repl.co, I'm going to do /Lauren. And when I put that in as a subpage, then it says, hello, Lauren. But what happens if you don't want the user to have to type this into the URL bar? What happens if you want the user to actually type it in to a form, like a text box? Because you can't expect the user to have to enter different website links every single time you want the page to do something. And so that's where a form comes in. And so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to set up a form before this paragraph tag. And so the way you do that is by doing an open tag, call it form. And let me close it right away so that replit just closes the form automatically for me. And then I can say something like action equals, and in this action I'm going to say greet. And so that particular action, greet, is going to have to match up with a function that's going to get called anytime that form gets triggered. And then we also need another attribute here, method, and that is going to say method equals post. And I think technically you're not supposed to have spacing in these. Not that it matters, but that's just the general notation that you normally use. And so basically what we did here is we made a form tag. Nothing is going to change in our actual website yet, but what that means is that it's going to be listening for a certain function to get called. And so then inside that form tag, I'm going to put a break tag, and I'm also going to make an input tag. Now, input tags do not need a close tag. And this type of input tag, I'm going to say is text. And what that means is it's just a text box. So when you say type equals text, that just means text box. I'm going to say name equals, and the name of it is going to correspond to the variable that it's going to be tied to in my Python code. And so I'm going to call this name underscore input. And then I am going to close my pointed bracket. And so now when I run this, I'm going to have a text box here. And so now I can put like a name. But now the problem is when I go to actually put in a name, I'm getting a method is not allowed for this requested URL. And that is because I do not have an action tied to the greet action here. And so what we need to do now is we need to make a function that gets tied to this greet action so that we do something with that. But before we do that, we need to make a button because our form is not going to get triggered unless we have some way to trigger it. And so let's do another break tag. And then let's do another input tag. But this time the type is going to be equal to submit. And the value is going to be equal to greet. And I'm also going to give it the ID of greet. And then I'm going to close it. And so now when I run this again, I have a greet button and I'm going to type in a name here, and when I click greet, it is going to, hopefully, instead of saying hello world, it's going to say hello to that person. And so now we need to somehow get our Python code to sync up with this form. And so here's our form tag, and here's everything inside of it. And so now we're going to go into main.py, and we are going to make another, so now under app root here, instead of just having hello world, I am going to have hello world here, but then I'm also going to have another function, and it's going to be app.root slash, and let's think about what action we want here. That action is greet. And this time, instead of just having a single parameter here in our app.root, I also need to specify the methods that are going to be used here. And in this case, it's going to be methods equals, and then an open list, and I'm going to say quote post, comma, quote get. And so basically this is saying that I want to be able to post things using this method, and I also want to get values using this method. And so those are HTTP methods that are used in order to get values or post values to a web page. And then I need to define a function. So I'm going to also call it greet. It can have a different name, but it's just good to, I don't know why it keeps doing that. It's just good to keep it the same name for just make your life easier. And then I'm going to say something like name equals. Then this is going to be new syntax to learn. It's request.form. And then I want to get the name that is input here. So we need to go back to our HTML code and think of what name is linked to the text box when the person enters their name. So let's go back to index.html, and we can see that in the text box, the name for that variable is name input. So then I'm going to go back to main. I'm going to call this name input. And then I am just going to render template. Same thing I had before. But now I'm going to say name equals name, which is just passing the name variable in as a parameter so that I can access it in my index.html. So here you're going to see undefined name request, and that is because we do not have that imported. So at the very top of your code, not only are you going to import Flask and render template, let's also import request. And now the red went away. And so when I run this, then now I can type in a name and click greet. And now it says, hello, Lauren, instead of hello, world. And so whatever you put inside here, it should hopefully change as you go. And so the only reason why we didn't have to take this name variable and like pass it into my index.html is because I already did that in the last video. So remember how in the last video we did a double open curly bracket here, and this specifies to the HTML code that you want to use a variable that has gotten passed through from your Python code. And so these double curly brackets tell your HTML code that. And so now name is a variable from main.py, and it's usable in here, and I can reference it by just using the name. and that is because it gets passed in when I render the index.html template here. If I did not have this line of code, I wouldn't be able to use name in my HTML. And that's it.